Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Blue Butterfly Effect podcast. I'm here with my co host, Millie, and we're so excited to be recording again today. Um, so, today we're bringing in something we don't normally bring in, which is pop culture, which I think is really interesting. Um, and the topic we want to talk about is really about love and relationship, connection. And something that inspired this conversation was the Netflix series Nobody Wants This, that a lot of people are talking about. Now, what brought this to our attention was not that people were liking the series, but how therapists and coaches were talking about the series. And it it hit Millie and I in a way that we were like, we need to talk more about this because this the series is like taking on a life of its own as far as in the healing world and the relationship space. So I'm going to pass it over to you, Millie, because you saw a lot of the stuff that was coming up, and I'd love to hear your point of view.
Yeah. I I saw I watched the series, and in terms of like the series itself, it's a great series. It's funny. It's in LA, which has, I love my city. It's a great series. And then I was going online and stuff started going viral about the series and how this series was like showing um, evolved love between two people who know exactly what they want, and coaches saying, this is the series that heals all millennial women. There's one line in particular that we'll get into. I sent you a reel about a therapist talking about how why this was such a great love. And I was just like, this can't be real. This can't be real. And the reason for that is that I saw none of that, none of it.
Right.
Maybe there were moments, but from the beginning of the series, we're talking about two people that went into a pretty toxic and very, very complicated situation. And we're here pretending like, oh, that's so romantic.
Right.
So what I saw online, I really wondered. I thought, wait a minute, this isn't at all what was happening here. This is an evolved, healthy love. These are two people, yes, who are adults and they have a lot of experiences, right, in their own right. It sounds like, particularly her, right, or the main character. Uh, 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 but this is not like a healthy situation by any means from the very beginning.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what was happening online, what I saw happen online, it was just the overlooking of all of these things, really just being softened by the fact that this guy just came off as a nice guy or
Mm-hmm.
came off as really like gentle, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I have opinions about that as well. So
Yeah.
that's that's what I saw. And it was like, it wasn't the series. I like the series. Like it was funny, but the life that it took on the internet
Yes.
was beyond me.
Yes, it blew my mind, and that ruined the series for me, like, because I was watching it because somebody had said they really liked it, and I was like, "Oh," and so if we could just take this as, like, a rom-com series, and I know it's based on someone's relationship, but I do feel like there were some things that were probably exaggerated for, comedic effect and things like that. Um, but it really was hard to enjoy when I was thinking of therapists saying how deep and connective this was and healing. Because I agree with you. Like, these are people that were stepping into like drama and chaos.
Mhm.
And so I want to start off with like the different characters. Like, I know that certain people can see themselves in those characters, right? What's interesting, I personally, when I was watching it, I felt like an alien because I couldn't see myself in any of the characters.
Oh,
Like
that's a
well,
good.
and because, well, I think, well, no, there's I don't think it's because I just think my character wasn't on the show for whatever reason, and my character's not really, like, popular in this culture. I'm, like, kind of the invisible observer, and so these characters were very dynamic, very sometimes over the top, and but the thing I think a lot of people resonated with that I heard was that the more masculine energy of Kristen Bell's character,
Mhm.
and I think women have found they've had to step into this perceived masculine, which I don't think is necessarily a healthy masculine.
Mm-mm.
Um, but so I want to say I can understand that people might see themselves in some of the characters or some of the things they were working through. Um, and I also feel like what we saw was instead of going into there were places in the show where they could have taken us down a really dramatic path where like
Right,
the guy takes weeks to call back or
right.
fights that were really dramatic. I think what I noticed is finally a TV show isn't taking us there. Like we don't
Mm.
have to have all this unnecessary agita. Like there is some form of perceived repair sooner. And so I think that was calmer on our nervous system. And that was refreshing. However, I didn't think it was very clean. um, and then the other thing I want to say is that I feel like it was a real statement on the depth of emotional connection that we as a culture allow ourselves to go to. And as a therapist, working with clients, it's very rare to have a client come in. They wouldn't come to me if they had this, who grew up in a family that was emotionally intelligent or taught emotional intelligence, that was emotionally connective, that was very mindful, aware, that they had clean relationships, that it wasn't a mesh, that there wasn't manipulation going on, that there wasn't codependency. I mean, and again, we're all codependent in some level. Um, but we grow up in emotionally messy households. And so
Mhm.
I think when we see something like this, it's like, oh, the bar is raised, but it's not raised that much higher.
Right.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I think I want to read something that I found online that I could not believe that I was reading this when I was reading it, but it says, the reason we are all obsessed with Nobody Wants This is because finally there is an on screen representation of healthy and evolved love. Two people who meet later with established careers and identities, have healthy communication, are open and vulnerable, and are willing to put the work in to build a healthy relationship, overcome what society says is right and wrong, and are not afraid to say the hard things. This is what healthy love looks like, and we are loving it. Okay.
Which one part do you want to start with? And it was like a
That,
7 episode series. Let's come on.
yeah, it's first of all, we have to understand that if Kristen Bell's character starts off by saying, I'm done with, what did she say? I'm done with like messy or something like that,
I
right?
think so, yeah.
From the beginning, I'm done with messy. I'm done with chaos or whatever. And the first thing she does is get into a messy ass situation. Okay. If she had stuck to her word, if she had stuck to her word, there'd be no series.
Right,
There'd be no series,
right.
right?
Mhm,
And so that right there was to me like the first sign of self abandonment. You're saying you
mhm,
want this, but you're not following through on your own word. You are going into a situation where this guy clearly is not someone that you can easily be with, who is coming out of a very messy situation that you're very well aware of, who, by
mhm,
the way, made you wait outside of his workplace, right? Like, made you wait outside of his workplace, right? Because
yeah,
you were not somehow allowed to be in there. Like, I
mhm,
remember watching that scene where he made her wait outside for him when she showed up
mhm.
after the service or whatever. And I was like, oh, like a puppy. He's making her wait outside like a puppy.
Yeah, yeah,
And so it's like, oh, it's okay. He's at work, or it's okay. I don't want to bother him. Okay. First of all, why did you show up? Right. But second of all, it's like it's these things that I think we tolerate, and we say that it's okay to tolerate. Oh, it's
mhm,
no big deal. Oh, it's just this. And this is just before they started like really being in a relationship. And
mm,
so these little things, that lead up to them actually being in a relationship together. Those were all red flags that led up to this apparently evolved love. And then we're calling it evolved love.
Right.
It's like
Right.
from the beginning, there was a tone set as to the place that he holds in her life. And people are saying, like, oh, well, at least he's nice. What?
Right. Right.
At least he's gentle. He's really sweet.
Right. There were
Yeah.
so many moments, like even her showing up to the temple. I
Mhm.
was like, if you're thinking, you would do some research. If you care about this person, you would decide like what would be appropriate or not appropriate. And I know, so this is one of those moments is like, what is real and what's like over the top. And I
Right.
just think, again, there's just this kind of like lack of consideration in that whole scene
Yeah.
about like, how would you actually show up? Would you show up like that? Would you even show up knowing this is a big deal for him? And he maybe has never done this before. And this is like a religious service. And
Right.
do are you going to draw attention to yourself rather than him being able to do his thing?
Right.
Um,
Such a
and
great.
like this became about you and your bright red dress in the back rather than like this is a big deal for him. But the
Mhm.
thing that just continuously happened on him that appeared to be nice, he would do these things
Mhm.
like make her wait outside or bring her somewhere that wasn't appropriate for her to be, like
Mhm.
having to hide her. And he would apologize. He would name the thing he knew was wrong. And that's where I think people were like, oh, that's so different. But what we weren't paying attention to is that
Right.
he would say, "Oh, I'm so sorry, get over it." Basically saying, "Oh, I'm
Exactly.
so sorry, I didn't mean it." And then he would like squash her. And I never
Mhm.
really saw her get a chance to say, "This is how it made me feel.
Mhm.
This is what was going on for me in that moment." I just feel like it was, "I'm so sorry. I'm going to soothe you with my sorries. And now we want to move on." So, yeah, like the soothing with apologies rather than like meaningful conversation or connection.
That what you just mentioned, I thought was pretty manipulative.
Yeah.
That didn't feel like he was genuinely sorry. That just felt this is what I have to do to like, get her to do what I want.
Yeah, like that cute face. Oh, and then we're gonna make a joke out of it. And I was like, wait, let her talk about how she felt.
Exactly. That's exactly right. And
Mhm,
you know, for a woman who was supposed to be like who has a podcast about empowerment and the modern independent woman, it's like
mm,
I did not get that from her at all. This
mm-mm,
is a woman who needed to call everybody to get their opinion about what she should do, and her sister even told her you shouldn't be yourself.
mhm.
What the fuck?
Yeah.
Like, I'm probably gonna cuss a lot in this episode because it like really, I tried to keep my calm, but it just gets on my
I love cussing. I love cussing.
it
Yes.
gets under my skin because how are we missing this? How
Mhm,
are we going online, people with massive platforms going online and saying this is what healthy love looks like? And it's like we're just overlooking all of the shit that we have been trying to heal from as
mhm,
women
mhm.
in a patriarchal world.
Yep.
Hello?
Yep.
I swear I was looking online and I kept like looking for like reviews, and all of the reviews were these rose-colored glasses, and I'm like, what is all of this collective work for?
Mhm,
What is all of the therapy for? What is all of the journaling for? If we're still saying that this is how a woman should be treated by a man,
right.
right?
Mhm,
So when he took her to, first off, they were going on a trip, and then he got a call from work and like did not discuss with her at all.
yep.
Listen, this is really important for me. He just made a decision for both of them.
Yep.
That would not fly. I can
Mm-mm,
understand that being important, but let's have a discussion because at that point they were supposedly already in a relationship.
mm,
And I think the way that he sweet talked her into like, oh, I know it's not that, but it's this and it's blah, blah, blah. Okay, fine.
All the sweet talking, though, is so condescending. She's not a puppy.
Exactly. Exactly. And then I think this is the part that will never leave me. When they were there and he introduced her as his friend,
Yeah.
that was like, I told you this when we were having a conversation. I would have made a scene. What? Your friend? Because
Mhm.
we just said we were in a relationship. We just said
Right.
all of these things. And here's the thing. I think that that's the place where we as women are afraid to go, because then we're labeled crazy. Then we're
Right.
labeled, this is why.
Yes.
And
Yes.
so we allow behavior that is inconsistent. And then when we're sweet talked, we're like, oh, but he didn't mean it. Oh, but he this. No, no. You
Mhm.
said something. You either meant it or you didn't. And now you're going to introduce me as your friend. I would have lost my shit. We would have had words, really loud ones in front of people. And I don't give a shit if I come off as crazy. And
Yeah.
I think that's the part that as women we have to own. We
Yeah.
have to own that part that gets enraged when we are told something and that shit is not followed through with, because that doesn't make us crazy. That
No.
means that people can't walk all over us.
Right. Right. You just watched her get smaller and smaller and smaller in those moments. And then his sweet talking, oh, make it okay. And it was like horrifying when he said that, like, and how humiliating and shaming. And first of all, to bring her to that situation, that to me, like, if this was real, then I'm kind of horrified, because you
Yeah,
don't take a Gentile woman to a situation like that, knowing how she might be held. Like, if you love someone, you don't even invite them into that situation until you have a stronger relationship. And the
right.
thing I noticed over and over again, them making decisions out of fear of losing the other person. And I'm like, if you're building something true that
Mhm.
feels as important as you're saying it is, then give it the time to build a foundation and trust. Like that whole Rebecca's box thing, I'm like, Rebecca's box wouldn't even be a blip on my screen. I can't even believe a whole episode was about that. And I get, I get, I'm a very odd person. Privacy is privacy. And if this person means something to me and I feel so good about what we're building, I don't give a shit what's in Rebecca's box, because Rebecca's box was last year, 6 months ago, last week, has nothing to do with me. And the
Right.
fact that we are obsessed with, now, again, what was comedy versus what was like true. But if people are like relating to this, I think we need to ask ourselves, why are we obsessed with the ex? Why?
Exactly.
If we trust the person, why? I don't need to know. I don't want to know. Why
Right.
self-torture yourself? And also, obviously, he left that.
Right.
And he's with you.
Right.
And if you trust him, that's a statement of like where your life is. I'm just like I'm kind of blown away at the lack of boundaries and the intrusive nature of, it's one thing if your partner is giving you reason to doubt,
Right.
and then you have a conversation. And then if
Mhm.
you feel like someone's lying to you, there might be a way that you like look for more information. But if you're already feeling that way, then that's a red flag to me. If
Absolutely.
you need to look in a box to make yourself feel better, then that makes me really sad. And I don't mean that from a judgmental place. I mean that from, we have to look at this from, what are we doing?
Right. Right. I think what you're speaking to, or at least what comes up for me as you mentioned that, I think is like the sense of self-possession, the sense
Mm,
of like, I've got me, right?
mhm.
Because I think it's important to understand that it's constantly said how much women are evolving in terms of like emotional intelligence, emotional growth, doing this work more than men. Like it's been statistically proven. Podcasts talk about it all the time, all of the things, right? But when we're talking about that, it's a self-possession thing. It's I've
Mhm.
got me.
Mhm.
This We have to be in that place within ourselves,
Right.
right? So much of the show felt to me like this woman's character was still waiting to be chosen by this man.
Yeah.
And that's so much of whether she was doing this relationship right or not was on his terms.
Right.
If she was good enough, if she was a good enough person, if she was successful enough, if whatever,
Hmm.
right? And so here we have this box which represented so many things. And I get it. Look, I get that. But this woman's character is like, what? She's an older millennial. So, what, late 30s, early 40s? There has to come a point where we have to be self possessed and be like, this is now. That was in the past. And of course, this man had a relationship, maybe more in the past. He is going to have things. He is allowed to have his privacy. He is allowed to not want to talk to me about it
Hmm.
because no matter what, I'm going to be okay.
Hmm.
I don't need him to acknowledge that or to say something about it so that I feel soothed, because that's also
Well,
another
that's
thing.
what's happening, right? You're soothing yourself by, yeah.
Exactly. You're expecting someone else to soothe you. You're expecting someone else to say certain things. And guess what? Okay, so in a real situation, if it's not the box, it's going to be something else, because we're talking about patterns here. We're
Yeah.
talking about habitual patterns in relationships.
Yes. Yes.
That's what we're talking about. And
Yes.
so if that's the case, if that's what anyone is moving through, there's nothing wrong with it. But we cannot romanticize it in this way because it's bullshit.
Right. I think the soothing behaviors, the way we soothe ourselves, and I think that's the thing that gets me so upset about this is this was very much about self gratification and soothing instead of like a healthy way of. And if the box is bothering you, and say, I notice you have a box, ask some questions, but you don't let a family member come in and all. And I granted that was all comedy, hopefully, and all that kind of stuff. But how do
Right.
we soothe ourselves in our relationships? Like, how do we manipulate and do that? And his family like was what it was, but that was not spoken. She was like the scene that got me, and it was cut off as a meme where he wraps his arms around her face and he's like, what does he say? He's like, I can handle you.
I can handle you. Oh God. I
Now,
need to shoot my TV.
I I didn't know the context of that. And so I can see why people see that and like at first maybe go, there must be something here. But then watching the series, I was like, wait, what about if she can handle you and your family and all the things? Like, I can handle you. And even this promise, like she's like, well, are you gonna break my heart? And he's like, I'm not going to. I'm like, how can you even say these things? Like these just aren't honest things. And then telling a woman you can handle her because she's vulnerable or scared or emotional is so offensive that that wasn't just the words. Like, how about we're in this together? This is messy. I got this. Like,
Right.
whatever arises in this relationship, we'll navigate together.
Yeah.
But not, I can handle you. Like, she's supposed to be tamed.
Right. Right.
I just found that really like unsettling and like stealing taking something from her of like her life and what she's going through and also like dude, you're a hot mess. And by the way, you have to get other people's opinions whether you should be in this or not. They're both. I'm like, do you either want this or not? Why do you need other people's opinions?
Right. Right. You know, what got me about that line is I saw a reel. I don't know who this person is. I don't know who the person that I saw is, but I remember she's a relationship coach. And
Mm.
what she said about that line is that that line healed the entire generation of millennial women. I was like, you have got to be fucking kidding me. First off, you know why that's so offensive? Because my healing has been my own, my fucking own.
Right.
Okay. On so many
Ah,
levels. I have traversed the dark nights of the soul. That shit has cost me thousands of dollars. It has cost me time and energy of my own. Okay.
mhm.
Now, I'm very fortunate to have a very kind man by my side who has walked beside me along all of this. But I'm sorry, that work was not his. He doesn't get to take credit for that. He's a beautiful man. He's a beautiful soul. I'm very lucky. And that's not his. That's
No,
mine.
no. Right.
What that tells me is that we are still living in a world where we are still wanting to be chosen by a man.
Mhm.
And that if a man tells us that, then that's how we decide. If a man tells us, I can handle you, then we say, oh, I'm lovable. It's okay
Mhm.
for me to be all of the things that I am because he's choosing me anyway.
Mhm.
I don't. We have to choose ourselves. We have to own our fire. We have to own our passion. We have to own the fact that we are intuitive beings who see through things. And the reason that we're not naming the things that we see is because we live in a society that has constantly told us that we're crazy when we name it.
Right.
And this chick is going online saying that that's the line that healed all millennial women. Get the fuck out of here with that.
I love your fire in this. I love it. And you know, the thing is, so this is a different part of our personalities that I think is so interesting is that um you feel it in your body sooner.
Mhm.
And I'm the type that I know that you have your own experience. I was gaslit so much that like someone can say that and it takes me a minute to like for it to hit my body. Like I'm a slow processor.
Mhm.
And it took me probably 2 or 3 times of watching that episode to figure what was bothering me. You
Yeah,
know, like I couldn't land on it because the messaging is music, this couple coming together. And this is how we gaslight ourselves. Is like we
exactly.
have people saying this, don't pay attention to what's really happening underneath. And for someone like my personality, I can be like, oh, is that what it's supposed to look like? And I'll know in my body it doesn't feel right.
Right.
Um, but I agree with you. It's like, what do you mean you can handle her? Like she can handle herself. And
Right.
she needs to know that she can handle herself. And
Exactly.
and you as her partner can support her like seeing that strength, mirror that strength. Like you got this. Whatever happens in our relationship, you got this. I got me, you got you. Um I remember, I think I've told you this story before, but it took me a long time to kind of see the power of this moment with my husband Lair when it was before we even started dating. But I was managing a bar and it was a really busy bar and like famous like baseball players and musicians would come in and like a lot of the girls at the time were like they were all over it and I just wasn't into that stuff. Like I'm the alien that's hiding in the corner because I don't want to be a part of any of this. But Lair was a bartender and I was a manager at the time. And this baseball player came up and started touching me. He's like rubbing my shoulders and giving me a massage. And I just froze. Now, I have physical abuse in my background, sexual abuse, you know. I'm sitting there, I froze, and that's my MO at that time is just to freeze. And I'm like, I don't know what to do in this situation because I don't have the fire that you had. And I always admire that. Like that wasn't available to me. And so I'm standing there and this guy's touching me and I just like so disgusted by his alcohol breath. And next thing you know, there's a man to my right and it's Lair. And rather than kick the guy's ass or start a fight, he looks at me and he says, hey, he goes, no one touches you unless you want them to.
Mhm.
And I remember hearing him say that and
Mhm.
going, oh, like him mirroring the possibility within me of my own strength or like my own boundaries that were possible. And that
Mhm.
is an example for our relationship. He has never tried to steal my self will or my empowerment. If anything, he's always been a mirror of, I know you're stronger than you think you are in this moment. I know what you're capable of. How can I
Mhm.
support you being the strongest version of yourself? And I feel like that was what was missing in this. This guy was like stealing her strength, like siphoning it off. And I don't know where it was going because I
Mhm.
was so like bored by him by episode like 4 or 5.
Oh, seriously.
But
Seriously.
that's what we're missing here is that type. Like I know you have a partner that just does that, and I have the partner that does that, and I know we're lucky. And I want to like share that there are people that want us to be a strong version of ourselves and mirror and support that. They
Yeah.
don't want to do the work for us. They don't want to pick us up. We're not a damsel in distress. I don't need to be swept away.
Mm-mm. Right. And it takes a certain, again, it takes that self possession, that self ownership of saying, this is how I am.
Yeah.
This is who I am. I have opinions. I have a brain. And here's the thing, that's going to turn a lot of people off.
Well,
Like,
that's the other thing.
it's
Being who
going,
you are is going to turn people off.
right. It's going to. I was single for many, many, many years before I met Carlos. And it was a shit show of things. It was like a shit show of dates and all kinds of weird experiences. I get it. And I was not willing to compromise that part of myself because it's very much a part of me,
Mhm.
right? It's very much a part of me. I can't deny it. Like
Yeah.
if it gets going, it's going to go, right?
Mhm.
I and I and I am a grounded person and I am a calm person and I am all of those things. And I'm also a woman in the world who, like many women, has worked her behind off to live a life that feels aligned with her.
Mhm.
Like, we have to take all of these things into consideration
Mhm.
when we are connecting, not just romantically to someone, but I think in any way. And the way that this series is just portrayed, that this is healthy and evolved love,
No.
it's so not. We're
No.
talking about a man here whose family has a key to his apartment, which I can understand, right? For emergencies, but his entire family was in his living room the next day or whatever when he saw when they were on a date, or I can't remember exactly what the order of things, but they were in his living room questioning him
Mhm.
about his life decisions.
Mhm.
No boundaries, no
No
backbone.
boundaries.
And so when you look at her character and who she is and how she goes about the world, there is a certain, like, yeah, there is some masculine energy in there, but it's, where is his backbone? Where are his boundaries? Where is he making decisions for himself?
Right. I mean, there were no examples, I felt like, of women in the healthy masculine and feminine. A lot of
Mhm.
the women were in their masculine, and it was not the healthy masculine. It was like aggressive and big. Um, and by the way, vulnerability, the things they talked about, that was not vulnerability. That's fake vulnerability. Like,
Right.
saying the thing saying, tell me a secret, like, that's not vulnerability.
Tell
I'm
me a
sorry. Tell me
secret.
something you wouldn't tell anyone. That's not vulnerability. Vulnerability is like really opening your heart, and you can be vulnerable when there's trust. And like that
Exactly.
vulnerability is sharing a piece of yourself. It's not talking about how you pooped your pants in second grade or even last week. That, to me, that's like fake vulnerability.
Right.
But it was interesting. The women were so much in a hyper masculine, and the
Yeah.
men were in like a overcompensate, like a unhealthy feminine. And I
Right.
was like, where is the example of here of some harmony or some balance?
Hmm.
And it was just like the men were all scared of the women. I was like, this, they're all scared of the women. And then like when she gets big, he's like trying to calm her down and like tame her. And it was very confusing. Do you know what I mean? And like you're talking about your fire and what you would tolerate and not tolerate. And I think what we as women need is that healthy masculine of, this is my boundary.
Right.
Don't handle me. Don't
Mhm.
leave me outside. Don't try to soothe me. Be with me.
Right.
Be with me in this moment. Let's navigate it together. But
Mhm.
let's not try to, like, I don't know, manipulate and do this weird dance and then also scare people. And like the women that were scaring their partners or their children into behaving, I was like, okay.
Right.
And
Mhm.
so I want to say all that with like, okay, this is a comedy, but also we're having people talk about healthy relationships. And there's a cultural piece that we're talking about, is that
Mhm.
we are confused as a culture. we are very confused about what true connection is to ourselves and to
Mm-hmm.
each other. And
Mm-hmm.
that's the thing I became more aware of. Like, it was like very shallow in a lot of areas. There wasn't a lot of depth. And I was like, it broke my heart a bit. Like, this is as far as we go. And
Right.
I'm gonna ask you to compromise yourself over and over again. The man was asking her to compromise herself, showing up to her work dinner. We haven't even got to that.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Lara couldn't even watch it. At that point, he's like, I'm out. I'm out. This wouldn't happen. No man's walking in and she's abandoning her dinner with Spotify that she's worked so hard for to
Yes.
listen to him perform this ceremony in the front of everybody. And everybody's just clapping as if they're not bothered by it all. I was like, okay, that's when I know it's a rom-com. And
Right.
people are interpreting it as like serious.
Exactly. That's so true. And the way that it was like they zoomed in on him and they zoomed in on her and the music, oh, he showed up for her. No, he intruded something that was important for her and made it about him again.
He soothed himself by walk. That's another example of soothing. He was uncomfortable with his behavior and he soothed himself. Sorry, I just
Right.
noticed that.
Yeah. By making it about him and making apparently the collective of women watching this being like, oh, that's what I want. You want someone who comes and interrupts something that is so important to you. That's what you want, something that you have been working for. No, no.
No.
That was another moment where I was like, I would have lost my shit. Like, what in the world are you doing here right now? This is not the time or place.
Yeah.
you had your chance. You had a time and place.
Yeah.
Which is why I'm here to begin with.
Right. And now you're going to have to wait outside.
Exactly. Exactly. The bar is so low. And I think that the reason that the bar is so low is because, again, and I'll say this again, we're still waiting to be chosen.
Yeah.
There's still a waiting to be chosen.
Mm-hmm.
And we cannot wait to be chosen by someone else, by anyone else. We have to choose ourselves. We have to choose ourselves. We have to be willing to say, no, this is how I love myself. This is who I am. And I think that it's important to name the fear of being alone.
Yeah.
It's important to name the fear of being alone.
Mm-hmm.
When we have, and I can understand that we need other people in our lives. Absolutely. Having a partnership with a romantic partnership that is healthy and stable and all of that, yes, it's beautiful. And that cannot happen to its core until we choose ourselves. Because even when you find someone and you're not fully there, what's going to determine the longevity of that relationship and whether it does turn out healthy or not, and whether it is sustainable or not, and grounded or not, is going to still determine each person choosing themselves, checking themselves so that then they can still come together. Mm-hmm. Because being in the relationship is just the beginning. It's a whole other thing on the other side of that. Mm-hmm. And you want a partner who has a backbone, who has boundaries, who you can tell that's not right. Your family cannot just be coming into my house. We will have problems, right?
Yeah.
It's a whole nother thing once you're in the relationship. There's still growth. Mm-hmm. And what you come to realize, and maybe you can probably attest to this, when you are in a relationship, what you really come to realize in the most loving way is that that person, that man, is just another human being on his own journey who never, ever, it was never his task to come and save you and make your life better and do all of these things.
No.
It was never, he can't do that. They can't do that. Because that's not their purpose.
No.
We didn't come here to soothe each other's egos. We came here to be each other's teachers, to reflect things back to each other. Mm-hmm. And the whole notion of I can handle you. Oh God, that is probably one of the more disturbing things I heard that entire series.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's what you're saying is, it's so important because I think, what does it mean to choose ourselves? And what
Right.
does it mean to be in relationship? And, when you're talking about soothing each other's egos, I think that we're taught like to just get rid of the discomfort quickly. How now this is the show I would want to watch. I would want to watch this moment where, okay, we haven't talked about this part, where he meets her family
Hmm.
and she's got the ick, which to
Right.
me, I get the ick to a point, but also I saw a man trying. I saw him trying to like
Right.
be there.
Right.
So he was curious. He was talking. Granted, he made some mistakes. He made some flaws. He got nervous, all those things. But I saw him in that moment trying to connect to these people that were a part of her life. Well,
Right.
what would have been really interesting to me if he would have gone out by the pool and asked more questions. How did it feel for me to see your dad and his new partner? How are
Mhm.
you doing? Like that looked like it was hard. Your mom seems like she's struggling. Like, how did it feel to see me in a blazer sport coat? It obviously brought something up for you. How are you doing? Like, not try to, again, make her small and make her laugh her way out of it.
Right.
Like, what's going on for you? In
Mhm.
that moment when she like can't look him in the eye and he says, I can handle you, what would have been really interesting for me, he said it was sexy, her vulnerability, but if he would have taken a moment to share a little bit of himself,
Yeah.
if he would have said, like, met her there in his way rather
Mhm.
than like trying to save her from that moment. Like, there were
Mhm.
so many opportunities. And I'm saying this because I feel like there's so many opportunities for us to get more curious about each other and to learn from each other and to go deeper. And
Mhm.
in all those moments that was perceived repair, we could have
Mhm.
gone deeper. And I know it's a show, but I'm saying this to people who don't know what that looks like. When you
Right.
leave me outside of the temple and you try to make me feel like it's okay, I just want to pull you aside and say, that felt awful.
Right.
I felt really like alone and like I didn't belong or I wasn't welcome. Oh,
Mhm.
tell me more about that. Like, let me understand. Let me hear you. Do you see what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
we just skipped over all those moments and we got to the snuggles and the fun. And relationship is those snuggles and fun. And it's more of these moments that we're talking about. It's more of, I said something that I regret saying, or I said it in a way that I regret, or I wasn't considerate in that moment, or I didn't listen, or I didn't see you or hear you, and that's where relationship comes from, like that kind of presence. But if we don't learn to be that kind of present for ourselves,
Mm.
if we don't know ourselves on that intimate level, like, how did it feel to me if I was left outside? Can I sit with like what that felt like? Can I communicate about that? If we don't know ourselves on that level, how are we going to relate to another person?
Oh, that's such a good point.
Lots
That's
of
the piece right
tangents.
there.
Yeah.
That's the piece right there.
Mm.
That's the self-possession piece. This is the who I am piece.
Yes.
That's it right there. How does this make me feel?
Right.
And w- making that a priority, because then when you don't, you expect the other person to know how you feel and then to make it better.
Yes.
And they're not there for that.
No.
They're there
No.
to, sure, they might notice something, but you have to know first, like, hey, that didn't feel right, or that felt a certain way, and communicating it. And then how that person responds is going to give you a ton of information as to where they're at.
Yes. And then it's a conversation.
Right. And what we're saying here might feel like a lot. And the fact of the matter is that it is.
It is.
It is. It is. This is what being in relationship is about, right? Like, I tell my clients, some intimacy, true intimacy, is created when you see the ugly of your partner and you two somehow are able to really walk through it, right?
Mhm.
But you have to have enough respect for yourselves. You have to have enough respect for each other to then go through that mucky feeling, which sucks and is
Yes.
hard, and it's a process. But when you get through it, you're on the other side and it's different. That's not what
Yes.
this show showed. And I don't think it was meant to show that.
I don't think so either. It would have
It's a
been a
show,
very different show
right?
and
It's a
not
show.
as popular.
Exactly. It's a show, is a rom-com, and it's still a rom-com, and it's still a fairy tale, and it's still the rose-colored glasses. And the fact that we're throwing words out there like this is healthy and evolved, I cringed.
Yep.
This is not evolved. This is still very minimal, very on the surface.
Yes.
And we need to know that. We just need to know that.
We need to know that. And I wanted to give a practical example. And I also want to say, I didn't start off in a relationship like this. I was a hot mess. I didn't know how to communicate. I was very dissociated.
Mhm,
I feel grateful that I had a partner who was so communicative, who would call me on my shit, you know?
mhm,
Um,
mhm,
and I would listen. And then I learned like how to communicate. And also I learned quickly to call him on his. But let's go to Rebecca's box example for a moment, because I think we need a practical moment. Okay. Old version of me would have been, let's just say I was triggered by Rebecca's box.
mhm,
I'm just using it as an example. Would
mhm.
have noticed the trigger and then couldn't calm myself and would have needed to get in a fight or have a conversation with Blair to make myself feel better, to prove why I was right for getting triggered. Now, that's Rebecca's box isn't personally a trigger for me, but I'm just using an example. Now, the me that has been in relationship to myself and learned to hold and soothe myself notices something like Rebecca's box, notices that I'm triggered, and I get curious about why I'm triggered. What is it about that? What story is my ego telling me? What story am I telling about my partner, for example? Now, let me
Yes.
look at the constancy of my relationship. Has my partner given me any reason for me to like doubt him or be suspicious of him? No. So,
Mhm,
how do I want to handle this Rebecca's box, which could be anything?
mhm.
You know, part of me is like, actually, I don't need to. Or if I notice it won't leave my body, I might say to Lair, I would probably say to Lair in this situation, I notice I'm triggered by this thing and I'm not really sure why, but I was wondering if we could talk about it. And
Yeah.
it's also my delivery of it. If I come at him like, what the fuck is that box in the closet? You know? And he's like, I don't know what but he triggers his, I'm in trouble. I don't know why. I'm in trouble. I don't know why. And next thing
Right.
you know, we're two kids fighting. But
Right.
if I come and I just say, I notice I'm having feelings about this thing and I don't really know why, then he could go, oh, let's talk about it. So we're
Mhm.
having a conversation, you
Yep.
know? Um, and I'm not using that conversation, him to make me feel better, but I notice there's some curiosity within me that I need to explore with him. Like
Mhm.
maybe even why do I all of a sudden not trust you?
Right.
What's going on here? You know, whatever it is. But do you see that? Does that make sense?
Oh my God, it makes so much sense. So much sense. And thank you for bringing that very practical example into the conversation because, like, even for me, that one of the greater struggles that I had with my partner at the beginning of our relationship is him telling me, when you're upset, you come at me. You come
Mm,
at
yeah.
me, talk to me, right? And I remember that it took me a while because of that fire, right? And I was always like on survival and the world is against me and I had to fight, like those things, right? And so I was putting that stuff on him,
Right.
right? And I remember it took me a while, like it took a while for it to sink in when he would say, you come at me, you don't
Mm.
speak to me.
Wow,
You
that's
come at
powerful.
me, you don't speak to me. And it took a while. And after like some time, I had to bring that conversation into therapy and be like, okay, there's something here that I'm not understanding. What is
Mhm.
it? That made a whole difference. But I think that it took him being self possessed within himself and saying, you don't get to do that.
Right.
That's not okay.
Mhm.
There was a boundary that he had that he established,
Mhm.
right? And then I had to ask deeper questions about myself and the understanding of, oh, it's that whole, I'm putting my entire past and all of my experiences on him,
Mhm.
right? So the same fire, again, that self-possession, that self-knowing, that same fire that I appreciate having in so many ways of my life is also something that can burn, you know?
Hmm.
And now what you said, it's like, it's not, it's the inquiry is always within first. The inquiry is always within first. It's like, wait, why does it bother me? Why do I all of a sudden don't trust you? Why have I forgotten who we are in this relationship in a moment, in an instant?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love you sharing that aspect of it because I think we can all relate to just like how we overcompensate or how we express ourselves when we are triggered.
Right.
And I can have a conversation with people
Mhm.
when we're in, like, when we're talking like this, but when someone comes at you or someone, it's like we all get triggered into a defended place. And
Right.
it's not a good place to have conversations.
Right.
Yeah.
And that that's an important key to learning to distinguish, because that does help you distinguish, oh, this there's an incongruency here.
Mhm.
And now I really can say something.
Yes.
You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
Because if we go back to the example of him in introducing her as a friend, it's, oh, okay, no, there's something wrong here. That's not what you said we were.
Mhm.
But it requires that we have that understanding within us. Like, this is when I'm coming at someone, and this is when I notice an incongruency, and I have every right to say something. And I think even that just requires so much mindfulness and presence.
Yes.
But what it tells us is that it's never really about the other person.
Right.
It first and foremost is about us. It has to be about us with us and them with them. And then things will play out in the dynamic of the relationship.
Yeah. And what you just said, I think that, but going back to that thing where you notice things quickly. And then I think for some people, including myself, because I was taught to override my body so often. And not that you weren't, I just think you have a different relationship to it, like the way you've moved to the world and the way I do.
Mhm.
I'll feel like in that situation, I would have felt the ping of like hurt. And then
Mhm.
I would have been like, oh, because you're not allowed to feel that way,
Right.
So there would have been a story there. And I would have turned over on myself. And I think
Mhm.
it's in those moments where we notice, where we're so self-aware, we notice the ping
Mhm.
and we go, oh, I need to reflect further on what that was, what that moment meant to me, and how I want to walk through it with myself and then with this person. And I think so many of us don't pay attention to those pings, and then it builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up.
Right. Right. That that's the key right there. There were so many moments of pings throughout the
Yes.
series for me that were just
Yes.
overlooked. That were just overlooked. Overlooked.
Yeah.
And it's still painting that portrait of, don't listen to that, listen to what he's saying. Listen
Right.
to what he says over what you feel. And we, like, even from an astrological perspective, it's like, that is that's not where we're headed. Like, that's not what the astrology is inviting us to do. It's inviting us to listen to that sovereignty, to learn to have a relationship with it, to communicate from that place.
Mhm.
We need to be very mindful about the things that we're listening to and who we're listening to,
Right.
right? And I'll say, if you don't agree with me, question it. If it doesn't, there are plenty of people that I follow that have said certain things, and I appreciate their work, and they say certain things. It's like, oh, well, I don't fully agree with that. It's not going to be me. But I think we just forget that there's a part that we forget to do that. And when something like this blows up in the way that it did on social media, where we're constantly seeing it, no, no, this isn't it. This isn't it.
Mhm. Right. It isn't
It's
it?
it's still very, it's still a picture painted under patriarchy. It's still a picture
Yes.
painted under a woman needs to be saved. She
Mhm.
needs to be told that she's okay by a man to believe that she's okay,
Mhm.
or anything or anyone outside of her.
Right. And we didn't even get in, which is a whole other thing, but into like him as a man and how wounded he is as a man, which is a conversation for another day. And
Right.
I'm not a man, so that may not be um, my conversation to have. But I love what you said. Is like if there's something that you pinged you in this conversation, like notice it. Notice
Right.
what made you comfortable, what didn't make you comfortable, and why. You
Right.
know, um, and get curious about it. Learning to sit with ourselves is probably the most important thing we can learn to do. Is the
That,
most important thing to do.
that, that. I think on a personal level, one of the things that I've realized for me this year is there is no greater purpose or calling in my life than to understand what's working within me.
Yes.
And that doesn't mean that I stop living life or that life stops being what it is. It's just, and I'm not aiming for perfection. I'm not aiming for any of that. There's intricacies, there's nuances, and there's so much of it that after a point, it's like, what else can be more important than to discover who you really are? And it's a lifelong thing. But that's how you create a relationship with yourself.
Mhm.
And then the concept of being alone changes, because this
Yeah.
is when we get to the real, to something real spiritual.
Mhm.
When I feel that when we make getting to know ourselves a priority, truly getting to know ourselves at a soul level and create a relationship with that, the concept of being alone changes because you realize that you're not.
Absolutely.
You realize you
Absolutely.
never are alone.
Never.
And that's important to mention too, especially because of the work that we do. We dive into other realms. We understand, we have a different relationship with the world that we live in. And this is what where in the collective I'm like, and I think it's a very Western way of looking at life,
Mhm.
that it's just here and now, that it's just the immediate surrounding, that there
Yeah.
is no relationship with something greater, nature, source, universe, soul, which is why it's so easy to continue perpetuating this ridiculous idea that we need to be saved by someone else.
Right. Well, and I don't have what you just said was so profound and so beautiful. And I think what I want to add is that I think people get confused between like getting to know yourself and, oh, you're just thinking about yourself. But what you're doing is you're getting to know yourself from the human perspective, the ego, how it operates in the world, and from that soul. And when you
Yep.
sit in that soul's light, like truly learn to connect to it, and it's a practice. We've talked about this. The source of unconditional love that you connect with, there's a
Oof.
sense of contentment and like that you don't long for anything. And
Yes.
granted, it's not something I'm accessing all the time, but when I can tap into it, when I get quiet enough, it is mind blowing what lives there. And
Mhm.
if we each as individuals could learn to be with ourselves in that way, to honor the human existence and learn to be an expression of that soul's love, what would it look like? Like this show would be boring,
Yeah.
you know? Like
Yeah.
things like this, like we would have like I just can't even imagine the kind of world we would live in that was more just like we as a collective, like the healing that would take place, the love that would be expressed, the respect, the reciprocity. But we can't live in that world until we get right with ourselves because otherwise we're enacting unconsciously or we're soothing or we're manipulating just to feel better all the time
Mhm.
rather than really being with.
Yes.
And that's a journey.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a lifelong journey.
It is.
So I'm really curious to see what people are going to have to say about this one. I'm
Yeah,
really curious. So share in the comments on Instagram. It's always great to receive messages from people. Uh,
absolutely.
you know, tell us how it rubbed you. And
Yeah,
uh,
I'd be curious, open to it.
because what I think that what you and I are talking about here is soul knowing of the self.
Yeah.
That's what we're really talking about here.
Mhm.
No longer being defined by all of these things outside of us, but understanding what it means to be defined by the light that does exist within.
Yes.
And that is not just some woo woo shit. That is like what we came here to recognize. And I think I personally am at a point where it's like we're either going to get this or not. Like this is it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We say we
Anyway,
want change, and are we willing to sit in this space to create change?
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, that's good.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful conversation. Thank you.
Thank
Until we meet again, maybe we'll bring something a little sparky to the next conversation. Who knows? I really enjoyed this. It was fun.
Yeah,
So thank you all for listening or watching if you're on YouTube. And thank you, Millie, as always.
absolutely. Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe button and hit that notification bell to be updated on new videos.
Click the video on screen to watch more episodes.
Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to hit the like and subscribe button and hit that notification bell to be updated on new videos.
Click the video on screen to watch more episodes.